Let's bring in MS Now White House reporter Jake Traylor, New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker. He is an MS Now political analyst and former U.S. ambassador to China under President Obama, Gary Locke. Jake, President Trump's response to a question about an arms package for Taiwan is getting a lot of attention this morning. What more do we know?
Yeah, Ariel, look, he was asked point blank on Air Force One by a reporter if the United States would defend Taiwan in the case of a Chinese attack. And President Trump told the reporter that he was actually asked that exact same question by President Xi in their earlier conversations. And he said that he told President Xi, quote, "I don't talk about that." Look, Xi warned Trump at the beginning of these two-day conversations that there was a just serious significance here in terms of how the United States and China go about these Taiwanese independence, saying that it could potentially have clashes and conflicts if they don't get to an agreeable place here. These relations are all underpinned by this potential selling of arms to Taiwan. The president saying he would soon make a determination on what that looks like going forward. Take a listen to more of that on Air Force One.
What about the arms sales to Taiwan?
I'll make a determination over the next fairly short period.
Well, you're not necessarily going to go ahead. It was your proposal.
Make a determination. I'm going to see. I have to speak to the person that right now is, you know who he is, that's running Taiwan.
Would the U.S. defend Taiwan if it came to it?
I don't want to say. I'm not going to say that. There's only one person that knows that. You know who it is? Me.
Ariel, just to even more underscore the significance of this issue, it was reported by Chinese state media that at some point in the conversations over the past couple of days, President Xi told President Trump that when it comes to the Taiwan question, that is the sole and most significant aspect of the ongoing United States and Chinese relations. So a really clearly significant moment that we are still waiting on, as the president says he's still going to make that determination shortly, but not made during this trip.
So, Peter, what do you make of the ambiguity that the president is sort of enlisting in this moment when it, the aid package to Taiwan, the military package for Taiwan, has broad bipartisan support? He's being ambiguous at best about whether or not the U.S. would defend Taiwan if the circumstances warranted. How should we all be reading this, and how is China reading this?
Yeah, first of all, let's remember that traditional American policy with regard to Taiwan has been something called strategic ambiguity. We have never, we have officially said we would defend Taiwan against a Chinese attack. However, President Biden, when he was in office, several times asked questions much like the one that was asked of President Trump today, said explicitly that he would, in fact, use the military force to defend Taiwan if it came to it. That was a break with years of that strategic ambiguity. Trump, in effect, is returning to that older policy, in effect, of saying, I'm not going to say one way or the other. We will just leave it at that. Now, does that mean he is backing off? We don't know. It's possible that he is simply viewing this as not wanting to poke China at the tail end of their meeting, wanting to keep whatever good feelings there have. We'll see if he actually follows through on the arms sales. That's the real test here. If he doesn't follow through on the arms sales, that would be a huge break with American tradition and policy with regard to Taiwan. If he's simply saying, I don't want to say right now because I don't want to spoil, the good feelings we had, but he ends up going through with it, that's a different thing. That could be seen as an act of diplomacy. We'll have to see.
Yeah, and this president tends to operate in an aura of ambiguity in general, so this may not be such a departure from what we've seen in other realms. Ambassador, how important are these arms deals to Taiwan and Asia Pacific as a whole? What are your concerns if the president doesn't approve this package?
Well, obviously, Taiwan is very concerned whether or not the United States is following through on its ambiguity toward it, but underlying support for Taiwan and its policy of saying that Taiwan and the mainland should resolve this peacefully without force. But the other nations are going to be watching to see whether or not America's word or commitment in terms of assistance, military or economic, really means anything. The Congress passed the arms sale on a bipartisan basis. It was initiated by the administration, the Trump administration. And so people are going to be watching. Can we trust America to follow through?
Jake, the Iran war, also very much a factor on this trip. Take us into those conversations.
Yeah, look, the president said he's asking no favors of President Xi and China when it comes to the Iranian conflict that has gone on now for months. The president did say they agreed on some of the more large and obvious issues, that they said that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, that the Strait of Hormuz should be open. Trump did really notably say that he is considering lifting sanctions on Chinese companies that buy Iranian oil. That is largely significant. China tends to be the largest buyer of Iranian oil. So if that is the case, that would be quite the move. And that also seems to be the theme of some of the conversations the president had in regards to Iran, in regards to Taiwan, is that there were conversations had, there was no substantive detail reached, and that the president is now making considerations, in this case, about lifting oil sanctions. Take a listen to the president speaking about that on Air Force One hours ago.
I'm not asking for any favors, because when you ask for favors, you have to do favors in return. We don't need favors.
We did discuss Iran. We feel very similar to Iran. We want that to end. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. We want the straits open. We're closing it now. They closed it, and we closed it on top of them.
A decision the U.S. had already made, right, to supply these arms. Now, he could change his mind later and decide to send those arms, to move forward on them. But a pause, if we could read it that way, is a win for China. And leading up to this, and we spoke about this prior to the summit, this had been the main concern among U.S. allies in the region, and frankly, many in this country, both Republican and Democrat, that the president would yield ground on Taiwan, whether that be on the arms sales or on language as to how the U.S. describes its relationship to Taiwan. Does it not support independence? Maybe he might move the language to it opposes independence. He didn't say that there. We don't know what he said privately, but that had been the concern going in. So here on Taiwan, from the president's statement, he gave some ground. Again, he could change it tomorrow or next week and say, actually, I'm going ahead with the arms deals, but a pause, time to think about it. He said also in his comments he's going to speak to the person in his administration who handles the Taiwan issue, is an opening for the Chinese leader. I also noted some other language in his comments here, which is him essentially repeating, mimicking, parroting China's view of Taiwan. He says, hey, look, we've had it for thousands of years. He's speaking from China's perspective, and then a certain period of time it left. That is China's view, that Taiwan belongs to China, and that this brief period of time, since the 40s, when it became, they can't use the word independent, but when it became separate from China, was the aberration, right? And it's much like we'll talk about the Ukraine war, right? Mimicking Russia's language about the invasion, whose fault it is, etc. I would say on Taiwan, those two things are movement in the direction of Xi Jinping. He would consider those positives. The other thing I'll say is, going into this, what was the U.S. going to get in return on Iran? Because that was a prime U.S. concern going in, and it doesn't appear, at least it didn't say, that he got any commitment from China to help there, other than to say that they'd like to see the Strait open. And he will say we don't need China, and you've heard that from other U.S. officials. But the fact is, they would certainly like Chinese pressure on Iran to help open up the Strait. So, other than Boeing aircraft sales and soybeans, which, by the way, there's no written commitment, right? And if you go back to the first Trump administration, China promised to buy a whole, loads of soybeans, and they didn't buy all those soybeans. Other than that, it's hard to see what the U.S. walks away from the summit with. It's concrete.
Trump flew to China for a two-day summit with Xi Jinping and came back with a promise that China might buy 200 Boeing jets. Might. Neither China nor Boeing has confirmed it. The former U.S. ambassador to China said going into this summit, people had very low expectations, and they were proven right. That is the diplomatic assessment of a man who served under Obama and has spent decades studying this relationship. Very low expectations, proven right. The Taiwan question is the most consequential thing that happened on this trip, and it happened in silence. Trump was asked point blank on Air Force One whether the United States would defend Taiwan if China get attacked. He said, I don't want to say. There's only one person who knows that, and who is it? That answer will be studied in Beijing for months. Xi told Trump that Taiwan is the sole and most significant aspect of the entire US-China relationship. And Trump responded by saying he doesn't talk about the arms sale that Congress approved on bipartisan basis that Trump administration itself initiated is now under review. Every US ally in the Asia Pacific is watching that review in real time. Xi is president for life. He knows Trump has 37 approval rating. He knows the Iran war is unpopular. He knows gas prices are destroying the middle class. He hosted Trump with state dinners and pageantry and performances from a position of complete confidence. Trump came home bragging about fantastic deals. The deals have not been confirmed. The Taiwan commitment has not been confirmed, and China is still buying Iranian oil. He came, he ate, he left. Xi got photo. America maybe got some Boeing jets.